On behalf of Kilmainham Inchicore Heritage Group, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's talk, which is taking place as part of Heritage Week, which is on this week from last Saturday to next Sunday. Lots of things all over the country, things in Dublin, talks, visits, some venues and places that you've nowhere to pay into are free, so check it out if you're not already aware of Heritage. This is Heritage Week. Our speaker tonight, Liam O'Mara, is a poet, historian, author of many books and quite a few really important reference books for the area here itself, like From Richmond Barracks to Keogh Square, published in 2014, When Paddy Worked on the Railway in 2021, and a book on the subject of tonight's talk, Goldenbridge Cemetery, which he published first in 2018, and it's been out of print, and it's now been republished, and it will be available here after the talk for anyone who wants to buy it, along with some others. This year marks the 250th, and this month indeed marks the 250th anniversary of the birth of Daniel O'Connell. And I asked him to give this talk at this time because I like the idea of us in the Heritage Group here linking these national movements to events locally. Daniel O'Connell is praised for the fact that he raised Irish people from a humiliation of 100 years, being a majority, but second-class citizens in their own country. And part of that humiliation was the humiliation, even after death, of not being able to be buried with religious ceremony. So I think it's an interesting way to mark Daniel O'Connell's link to our area and our area's link to that sort of great popular movement that Daniel O'Connell started. And indeed, we tend in Ireland to split up, you know, the constitutional patriots from those who used more violent and active means. But Patrick Pearse, I think, acknowledged that 1916 wouldn't have happened if Daniel O'Connell hadn't also been there and done what he did. So it's a sort of continuous movement. And with that, I'm going to introduce Liam O'Mara to tell us about Goldenbridge Cemetery.
Okay, so welcome to 45 minutes of headstone hysteria. Each headstone telling a different story. Some will take you to exotic places, from Cairo to the Mississippi to Botany Bay. Not necessarily in that order. Before we get to that, I want to talk, as Francis has alluded to, I want to talk a little bit about the man himself, about Daniel O'Connell, because this is the 250th anniversary of his birth. The Liberator, as he was known, and his association with this area. He was born in 1775, 250 years ago this year. Now, he championed many causes, but foremost were his campaigns for repeal of the Act of Union and for Catholic emancipation. He was an outstanding orator. It's said that at least 500,000 people attended his monster meeting on the hill of Tara. He was definitely someone of whom it could truly be said, we will not see his like again. Although we do have Danny Healy-Rae, Matty McGrath, and some other fine speakers. Not the same. I can't imagine 500,000 people turning up on a freezing cold January day to see either of those. Now, King George IV was very unpopular. He had reigned for many years as Prince Regent, but when he ascended the throne in 1820, the first thing he attempted to do was divorce his estranged wife, Caroline. She was much admired by the Irish, and this added to the king's unpopularity. His loyal followers decided to hold a meeting in Kilmainham, where they would extol his virtues and give their approbation of him as king. When O'Connell heard of this, he set out to scupper the meeting, and he enlisted the services of Lord Cloncurry and some of his followers. When the royal royalists arrived at the courthouse, they found that the place was already overcrowded. Lords Holt and Frankfurt could not get in. They had to be lifted into the windows, seated in chairs. 4 policemen did the honours, lifted them up through the windows and delivered them to 4 policemen on the inside who received their bulky cargoes. I should mention that Lord Holt in particular was an enormously rotund man, and the spectacle of him wedged in a chair appearing into the window caused great hilarity. Some say that the whole courtroom went dark, such was his gift. Lord Cloncurry did not disappoint and filibustered at every opportunity. Mr. Richard Steele, the High Sheriff, who was chairing the meeting, lost his patience and called on the military to clear out the court, which they did at bayonet point. Not to be defeated, O'Connell reconvened the meeting on the opposite side of the street, outside of a tavern, which I would say was John Warren's pub. I'm doing a history of the pubs in the area. I reckon it was John Warren's pub, later to be renamed the Victoria Tavern. And that concludes that episode. But just to put you, as I say, in the picture, what I described there is even funnier than what they're seeing here, because you can see them climbing in the window here, but they were actually on chairs, being lifted in by 4 policemen, and then they had to be collected on the other side and dropped down into the courthouse. So, of course, the cartoonists of the day, they had a great time. And all of this, of course, was exactly what O'Connell would have wished for. Publicity, propaganda. And here we are, the military clearing the court, and Cloncurry here, of course, refusing to leave. It was dubbed the Kilmainham outrage. And now to the story of Goldenbridge Cemetery. After the Reformation, Catholics were buried in Church of Ireland graveyards, and the revenue sent to the English Church. Even with that arrangement, Protestant bishops were wont to complain about the performance of Catholic rites on such occasions. The main burial places in Dublin were the ancient Bully's Acre, you can see here, where criminals and rebels were buried, but also people of high status because of its association with St. John's Well. Robert Emmet, who was buried there and since was resurrected, either by friends or perhaps by body snatchers. Nobody has ever made that point. Daniel Donnelly, the world famous boxing champion, there were 80,000 people at his funeral, and he was buried in Bully's Acre. He too was resurrected, and such was the hue and cry that followed, that they traced the surgeon who had instructed his body to be removed, and they got the body back minus his famous right arm, which is doing a world tour to this day. Another place where people were buried was St. James's Churchyard. And some of you might have heard the story where the procession would travel 3 times around the fountain, and this was to enable the mourners to say their prayers, because they weren't allowed to say them inside the cemetery. And finally we have, most significantly of all, was Kevin's in Camden Row. It was at St. Kevin's ground that a major incident occurred which would eventually change how burials would be conducted in the future. It happened at the burial of Arthur Darcy, a prominent businessman, but more significantly, a personal friend of Daniel O'Connell. A Catholic archdeacon was to perform the burial rites, but the Protestant archbishop issued instructions prohibiting this. The mourners overcame the difficulty by reciting the prayers to themselves, but when word reached O'Connell, he felt insulted. O'Connell's son Daniel was in the brewing business, and so was Darcy's younger brother John. Indeed, within a few years of the incident, Darcy would take over the brewing of O'Connell's Ale, which was advertised as the alternative to Guinness's Black Protestant Porter. Daniel O'Connell looked into the law regarding burials and found that there was no law forbidding the creation of a Catholic burial ground. A 2-acre site was acquired at Goldenbridge, but O'Connell insisted that the new ground should be non-denominational as opposed to Catholic only, because that would have been hypocritical. And there we had the foundation stone laid by Patrick Joseph Kelly on the 16th of May 1829. Now this drawing is from one of the original memorial books listing the names of those interred at Goldenbridge. And it comes with the memento mori: what you are, we once were; what we are, you soon will be. It's one of these reflective thoughts to make you think about your mortality. So Richmond Burial Ground was opened in 1829, and that was the official name. Over time, it would become known as Goldenbridge. Its ambitious design, inspired by Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, features a magnificent mortuary chapel or temple, underneath of which was a crypt, and at the rear a staircase leading to the roof. There was also a small enclosure where the watchman kept his guard dogs. We also had a planting of evergreen trees and shrubs, giving the cemetery a garden-like appearance. The only tree that is not an evergreen is a copper beech in the centre. It's a magnificent centrepiece and said to be planted by O'Connell himself. And we had the Sexton's Lodge and a grave location index of letters and numbers painted on the walls. Regrettably, this feature of the cemetery has not been upgraded. And it's one thing that I feel very strongly about. It should be a fairly simple task to give to false workers. A nice job and a very great benefit to people looking up their ancestors. One of my favourite features is the seat of melancholia. On the other side of this curvature in the wall, there was a seat where mourners and visitors could sit and contemplate. And again, this is from the original books. And the very first name here you see is the Reverend Lawrence Sylvester Whelan. And we've been told for many years that he was the first to be buried there, but I've since proven that that is not the case. He was originally buried under the floor of the church in Dolphin's Barn and reinterred at Goldenbridge, but not before Margaret Lowry. The headstone of Margaret Lowry bears the inscription: "This stone was erected by William Lowry of Watling Street, a skinner, in memory of his beloved daughter, who departed this life on the 2nd of October, 1829, aged 18 years. She was the first to be interred in this churchyard." Now you might wonder about the date, the 2nd of October, when the cemetery was not opened until the 15th. Margaret was one of 4 coffins which were stored in the vault awaiting the opening. Father Whelan was buried 3 days after Margaret. Father James Harold, one of the most notable people to be buried at Goldenbridge. Depending on which side of the world you were living, He is Father Harold of Saggart, but he's also Father Harold of Botany Bay. He was sympathetic to the cause of the United Irishmen and gave shelter to one Felix O'Rourke in his house in Saggart. This became known to the Crown forces, who raided the house in his absence, and they found pikes and other weapons in the thatch. His house was set on fire, and Father Harold was later arrested and banished to New South Wales. O'Rourke was hanged in 1803 from one of the remaining beams in Father Harold's house. Father Harold unofficially ministered to the convicts in Botany Bay and built up a lasting reputation in that area. He was eventually pardoned and returned to Ireland, where he spent the last 15 years of his life. And that's his headstone, 1830. One of the most striking memorials in the cemetery is the obelisk to the Reverend Andrew Dean Lube. He was part of the committee who championed the opening of the cemetery, campaign for the opening of the cemetery, and he was the parish priest of St. James's Parish Church. It was Dean Lube who was mainly responsible for the new church of St. James, replacing the old one at the junction of Watling Street. And now we have a great story coming up for you. This is one of my favourite headstones in the cemetery. And the inscription reads, Captain George Wade. And you can see the beautiful lettering. When you look at it, it's like it's written in gold. And you consider this headstone is 200 years old, and it's as though it was only inscribed. And when I read it, the inscription tells a sad tale in memory not just of Captain Wade, but his children who preceded him. John, aged 2 years in 1831, and Agnes, who died 4 years later, aged 12 months. And I was so taken by the headstone that I decided to investigate further. The story takes us to Egypt, where the captain sailed the ship, the Bark Nile, from Alexandria to Cairo. From Alexandria to Glasgow, carrying a cargo of rags. The ship was caught in a storm, and Captain Wade was thrown onto the deck and broke his leg. On arrival back in Dublin, he was taken to Baggot Street Hospital, where his leg was amputated. But it wasn't enough to save him. He died the following day. Now, as for the cargo of rags, therein is a fascinating tale. Rags were used in the manufacture of paper prior to wood pulp. Usually, rags were collected locally, but the supply was becoming scarce. In 1855, as the British were constructing a railway from Alexandria to Cairo, everywhere they dug, they were unearthing mummies wrapped in cloth. Before long, shiploads of such material was being brought to Britain and America for paper manufacturing.
From the mummies?
Yes, from the cloth. The story of the two Kenrick brothers was the subject of a book. It's an amazing story of two sons of a Mrs. Jane Eustace. And these both became bishops and were sent to America. They were pioneers of the Catholic Church. Peter was the Bishop of St. Louis, Missouri, the first Archbishop west of the Mississippi River. Francis became Archbishop of Baltimore. They were both buried in the States, but Jane, their mother, was buried here in Goldenbridge. Mr. Donoghue, the cemetery keeper, had a lot of American tourists wanting to see the grave. This is his brother. And body snatching was a regular occurrence in many places before 1832. There's no known successful snatch recorded at Goldenbridge, which was guarded by a watchman and some Cuban bloodhounds. One watchman claimed to have fought off the rogues and to have received the belt of a shovel across his chest. However, he was not taken seriously owing to his predilection for spirits, the ones that come out of whiskey bottles. In 1832, a new law was passed, the Anatomy Act, which gave doctors legal right to dissect donated bodies. The practice of body snatching didn't end completely, but was somewhat reduced. Now, just reminds me of some of the Dave Allen sketches. And the occasion of a funeral could often lead to an altercation in a family. Usually the dispute was to where the corpse was to be buried. It was a bit of an excuse for a free-for-all, and long-held enmities would rise to the surface, especially after heavy drinking. Opposing groups would meet, each armed with cudgels, known as shillelaghs, and engage in what was known as faction fighting. One such event took place outside the gates of Goldenbridge in 1836. And dear to my heart, in my teens, I was obsessed with the writings of Sheridan Leffernan. And these are the graves of Captain Lanphier and Bridget Kavanagh. Bridget of Goldenbridge was related to the barn walls of Drimnagh Castle. Captain James Lanphier lived at Ballyfermot House, known as the Tiled House, and the subject of a ghost story by Joseph Sheridan Leffernan, contained in his book, The House by the Churchyard. And we have Ballyfermot Castle and the house. And this is the grave of James McCann, Senior, a publican. It's significant that he has a headstone designated to him in 1847. At the other end of the wall, in the east corner, was a mass grave to the famine victims that year. Another, just to show you the location, beside Father Ryan's old presbytery on the canal. And now this is James McCann Jr., also buried here in 1918, and he was a publican, a town commissioner and a builder. He was the proprietor of the Forester's Arms at Tyrconnell Road, which became known as the Tyrconnell House. And he also had the Black Line at one stage. And he also built a couple of houses known as Tyrconnell Villas. But there's the Tyrconnell Villas. Here we have the Forester's Arms, renamed the Tyrconnell House, and on the right, the Black Line. There was originally a little garden here which was removed for when they widened the road, but the original entrance was here, where the Inchicore Pharmacy is today. This is the United Irishman, Patrick O'Kelly. He was buried here in 1858. A rebel, but also remembered as a peacemaker, because he managed to negotiate a peace deal with General Dundas and Captain Lake after the defeat of Knockallin near Kilcullen. Remarkably, the Irish were allowed to return to their homes. He later wrote a general history of 1798, which today provides much of what we know about the rebellion. So a very important figure. This is the grave of Captain George Smith of the 30th Regiment, Cambridgeshire. You can see that the grave is now partially hidden inside a tree. I thought that was novel. I passed it many times not noticing the grave. Now, John Proctor was a butcher who owned a butcher shop, slaughterhouse and a tavern on Emmett Road. He inherited land in Kildare, but died before he could claim it, owing to legal wrangling. His son eventually benefited and built a new house for his widowed sister, and he renovated the old tavern. The three buildings are today Ardmore House, otherwise known as Tom Tavies, Victoria House, today known as Small Changes, and the flower shop, which was once Emmett Hall, where Jim Larkin had a branch of the ITGWU, where the Citizen Army and the Irish Volunteers used to meet, and where Michael Mallon lived and had a shop. All of these buildings were owned by John Proctor. Despite its proximity to Richmond Barracks, and despite the ground being non-denominational, there are few soldiers buried at Goldenbridge. However, there are graves of soldiers' children. This is the headstone of Martha Tuckwell, aged 2, daughter of the bandmaster with the 12th Regiment of Foot, 1856. And this one, William Thompson, a 3-year-old son of Michael Thompson of the Royal Regiment, 1834. Now, this photograph was taken of William Sheedy in Mountjoy Jail in 1868, a Fenian. It is said that the Fenians were among the first in Ireland to have mugshots taken. This photograph is from the New York Public Library. Now, he's described as a young man. You can have your own ideas about that. His funeral was very large, walked 4 deep behind from North King Street to Goldenbridge. An estimated 3,200 in the procession on the road, and another 2,500 on the footpath. 80 cabs full were also attended, and no trouble reported. Now, I think Sheedy's funeral was significant for another reason, although no one has mentioned it. Earlier that year, the cemetery was closed to all except those who already had a family plot. For a few years prior to this, the military had campaigned for its closure, falsely claiming that the drainage from the graveyard was contaminating their drinking water, and also about the noise from those attending funerals, which they claimed was interfering with the soldiers' drilling practices. Sheedy's enormous turnout must have infuriated the authorities. And here we have nearby Richmond Barracks. Right, this actually is the barn wall plot, but we're going to go back to that one. Interments continued, though now reduced to those with family plots. This is the impressive memorial to Edward Broderick of the Myra House, 1886. Ed, for many years, was the proprietor of the Richmond Tavern on Emmett Road. And this is the barn wall plot with 7 family members of various states. The barn walls were connected with Drimna Castle and Ballyfermot Castle. They owned a lot of land in Inchicore, a lot of the houses on Emmett Road when the area was part of Goldenbridge. The Bias barn wall appears on the deeds of the Rose Tavern, now known as the Glen of Aherlow. This is all from my pub studies. It's funny how everything joins up, you know. Dr. Robert Kenny, renowned surgeon attached to the North Dublin Union. He was a devout follower of Charles Stewart Parnell, and he was a family doctor to James Joyce and his mother. He attended Joyce's mother, for which he is immortalised in Ulysses. Joyce, of course, was among the mourners here at Dr. Kenny's funeral, along with John Redmond of the Home Rule Party, Thomas Kettle, MP, the poet who later died in the Battle of the Somme, 1916. And this is the MacDonough family, a family who come over from England to work in the railway works in Inchicore. They all held positions there, even the women who worked in the sewing club. In August 1914, John, a retired engine driver, died, and when his wife heard the news, she too passed. These are the two here. Their remains were removed in 2 hearses and a double funeral was held at Goldenbridge. Their daughter, Catherine, married into another railway family, the Warfields. Her grandchildren, Brian and Derek, are the singers of the Wolf Tones folk group. And the Warfield's grave. This is Frank Burke, who was a half-brother of W.T. Cosgrave. During 1916, he was stationed in the South Dublin Union in the back of the hospital. A comrade with a pipe asked him for a light. And Frank leaned over with a match. This unfortunately made him a target for a sniper, and he was shot through the neck. The man with the pipe blamed himself and suffered a breakdown from which he never fully recovered. This is a family photo showing the McGraths. Mrs. McGrath with her baby Nicholas on her lap, and our young son Eugene on the right. She was known locally as Niney McGrath, and she ran a pub in the Puck area. During Easter week, Eugene was out playing with his football when the ball struck a guard on duty at Richmond Barracks. The soldiers were on high alert because of the rebels' occupation of the South Dublin Union. The sentry turned and fired, mortally wounding the boy. He was taken to McGrath's pub and laid out on the table. The next morning he was buried at Goldenbridge. Of course, women too played a part in the rising, and this is the grave of Marion Jenkins of Old Kilmainham, a member of Cumann na Món. She was a dispatch and munitions carrier. She was also active during the War of Independence and was imprisoned by the Irish Free State. She was one of 70 women who went on hunger strike over the conditions. She was released, but her health had suffered and she died at the young age of 39. And these fine men look like they're in their pyjamas, and actually a rugby team. Dr. Daniel Andrew Clinch, a rugby player. He played for Ireland and the British Lions team that toured South Africa in 1896. He saw service in the First World War as part of the RAMC Medical Corps. He died in 1937, and his son Daniel also followed in his footsteps both in rugby and in military service, and he was killed in the Second World War. So this man here is Daniel Clinch. And this is the main man, the best known grave in the cemetery. A fine granite cross headstone stood here for 100 years before being vandalised. Cosgrave fought in the South Dublin Union and was sentenced to be executed. But this was commuted. He went on to be president of the Provisional Government of the Free State, and he died in 1965. And this is his funeral on St. Vincent Street. The opposite side from where you are now, just over here. St. James's Barn. And inside the cemetery. And his son Liam Cosgrave at the funeral.
What year was that?
Oh, that would have been 65, wasn't it? 65, yeah. Equivalently of this far out, the very popular cemetery keeper, Mr. Donoghue, and his wife, who looked after the cemetery for so many years. And I think it was only after he retired that the graveyard was vandalised. The replacement cross on Mr. Cosgrave's grave. His headstone, his cross had to be completely replaced. Kenny, whom we mentioned earlier, and Jenkins, both of their headstones were smashed, but they were able to be repaired. There were 27 headstones in all that were smashed. When we hear the stories about Keogh Square and St. Michael's Estate, the cemetery was left unscathed during those years. We had a reopening day in May 2017. After 148 years, the graveyard was officially reopened as a place for burial. A grand reopening day was organised, and here we see the women of the local Weavers Club in traditional costume. We had an actor reenacting a speech by Daniel O'Connell. The beautifully restored mortuary chapel. Some of the original features reinstalled, such as the original bell. And the lodge was completely overhauled. And there we have George McCullough of Glasnevin Cemetery giving the speech there. In attendance, the St. James's Band. And this is a still from the Miss Scarlet Detective television series that was filmed in Goldenbridge, and it captures its Gothic appeal. If you haven't seen the series, I urge you to have a view of it. It's a great series, great detective series. Miss Scarlet and the Duke.
Scarlet and the Duke.
It's often repeated, yeah. So that's from the series 1, which was filmed in Dublin. It then went overseas to be filmed in different countries. But all of series 1 was filmed here in Ireland. Another one. Now, in October 2017, former Taoiseach Liam Cosgrave died. He had attended the reopening, but I remember thinking he was looking very frail. I'd met him several times during 2016, 2017. He was still sharp, witty and eloquent right up to the last. And his funeral then, Leo Varadkar there on Business Street. And now the twin crosses on the Cosgrave spot. In 2018, a headstone was erected to Eugene Lynch. We heard his story earlier, and other family members of the McGrath family. And here we have the Lord Mayor, Micheál MacDonald. Goldenbridge, also famous for its swans. Along the canal. You can see the wall there, it looks quite, it's quite small, but it's actually in a ditch. So don't be deceived. Not that easy to get over. And of course, when it was reopened for burial, now you can buy a plot there, and we have some recent burials. This one to a great character, a very popular character in the area, Anne Fitzpatrick of Woodfield. Always leave you with a smile on your face. Fondly remembered. And Tom Mackin of Emmett Road, local artist and Joycean scholar. Myself with George McCullough of Glasnevin, and this was at the original launch of the book.
Give Kennedy a mention.
Hmm?
Give Kennedy a mention.
What was his first name then?
John Kennedy.
John Kennedy. Okay, John Kennedy.
Yeah, he
George
was,
McCullough. Don't know who to get a guy. Well, look well at this vista because you will see it no more. Even now, it's obscured with this hoarding, and when that comes down, you'll have blocks, very high-rise blocks of flats. And somebody has written a book about this. There you go. That concludes my talk. If anybody has any questions or anything would like to ask.
How did the Cosgraves have their grave plot in Goldenbridge?
Well, he was born on Mount Brown there,
Oh, was he?
the pub called Kenny's,
Ah, yeah.
Mount Brown. That's where he was born. That's where his family lived. And his uncle was actually shot dead there during 22 by the irregulars. So that was the family cemetery, you know.
Right.
No, and it's not just himself and his son. There's a whole dynasty of Cosgraves buried there.
Right.
Is the little church open during the tours?
Well, it's open, like you can walk right into it. There's no doors on it or anything like that. It's a temple. It's only there for performing mass and that and burial rites.
Oh, yeah, it's just like a shelter, really.
It's only a shelter. Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liam, is Burke, Frank Burke, is he buried with the Cosgraves there, or?
As far as I know, he's there as well. Yeah, he's a half brother
Yes.
on the mother's side. Yeah. Yeah. So,
He had a nickname, do you
go
remember?
on. I don't know.
Yeah, Gubba.
Go on. Yeah.
Gubba. And he was fondly remembered by Liam Cosgrave himself.
Yeah.
He
Michael will tell you a lovely story. You mentioned Kenny's pub there.
yeah.
We were replaced. The original plaque on Kenny's pub was smashed, and Michael had it replaced, and we had a lovely time there. But Liam Cosgrave was giving a speech.
I invited him to give a speech, to unveil the plaque to his father. And I was explaining we were trying to arrange dates that would suit him and suit the pub owner. And I said, and Mr. Kenny owned the pub. And I said to Liam Cosgrave, I said, we'll have to arrange it to suit Mr. Kenny. And he said, oh yes, he said, he will, he's very busy at the moment. So he thought I was talking about Andy Kenny, the Taoiseach. The problem then was I had to invite Andy Kenny, which caused a lot of problems because they knew my politics and they were afraid that there'd be a clash.
It was an ambush.
That might be an ambush. But anyway, it worked out very well, and Liam Cosgrave was in great form, and Liam presented him with a book. Was it this book? It might have been this book.
No, it wouldn't have been that. No,
Yeah,
I know
he
it
presented with a book, and he was giving a speech, and he was presented with the book. And he's very dry sense of humour, Liam Cosgrave, and he said. Goldenbridge, he said, my father's buried up there, he said. Not in the convent now, in the graveyard.
The irony of being buried in the convent when, when you consider the association.
Not in the convent.
What happened, you know, the executions and that. So there was a great dry, dark humour there. Yeah.
But it was quite significant that that WT, as we call him, he lived in the pub over there. That was where he was from, and he was one of the leading figures in the South Dublin Union in 1916. I don't know, was he second or third in command. Eamon Kant was in charge there, but I think WT was, and it wasn't.
He was sentenced to be executed.
Oh yeah.
His name is on the plaque here, I'm sure. And he was sentenced to be executed. He was expecting to be. He was listening to the others going off to be shot, and he was just waiting for the door to be opened and he to be next, but it didn't happen. He's very lucky. But he has a lot of associations with this area. When the Irish Army, first of all, the Richmond Barracks was handed over to the Irish Army, but they only had it for 2 years. Then the treaty was signed, so the English moved out and the Irish Army came in. And so after 2 years then, there was no need for military presence here. So Cosgrave, WT, got the idea to give it over to housing because we had an emergency housing crisis at the time. So this was supposed to be a temporary arrangement back in 1924, I think it was. But of course it was there till 1969. All of the rest of the buildings became tenements. These three were left out of the picture because they were so big, it would have been very difficult for them to be converted into houses or flatlets. So he gave these three buildings to the school. The school at that stage was over the other side, over in Goldenbridge. So then the boys started coming over here. But that was Cosgrave that did all that, you know. And then it was Liam Cosgrave who unveiled that plaque. I think it was in 1970 or sometime.
Yeah.
So there were lots of connections.
And the plaque commemorates the men who were court-martialed in this room.
Well, they were held here, yeah.
Yeah.
They were held overnight here, and there was a block over here, and they were actually held there in court martial. There was about 190 originally sentenced to be executed, and then when Asquith came over, he put a stop to all that. He wasn't in time to save the James Connolly or Sean McDermott, but he was able to save anyone else.
Kind of just as you've been there on Daniel O'Connell and Goldenbridge and setting up of it, and Daniel O'Connell being involved, and how did it happen, like regarding, had we as Catholics to pay for it or buy into it, or was it just the Catholic cemetery only then, even though I know Daniel O'Connell was denominational?
No, it wasn't non-denominational. What happened was when the Catholic committee, they had a committee, you know, when they discovered how much money was to be made out of burials, they thought, we're on to a good thing here. So then they opened a much bigger cemetery, Glasnevin, within a few years. We're making a fortune. I couldn't believe how much money was to be made, you know. I think Glasnevin kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a city now, a city of the dead. So, they paid, it was owned, the 2 acres there was owned by a Protestant. But a member of the Catholic committee was a friend of his, and he managed to persuade him to part with the land. It was unusual that those 2 acres were separately owned, because all of the land here was owned by William Smith, who lived in Goldenbridge House. But for some reason, he didn't have that little piece of land there, so they had to approach this Protestant for it, and managed to secure it.
Right.
So the money was raised. I forget how much it was. It was a lot of money anyway, and they were soon able to pay back the loan with the burial fees, you know. And some of the profits made were invested in schools, model schools. So I'm really going off on a tangent here.
Yeah, no, it's okay, thank you.
Liam, you mentioned that the soldiers were complaining that the drinking water was being tarnished.
That was just to close it down.
Where did that come from now? Was that like a well from the Camac, or was it?
Yeah, they were blaming it on, I think they were drinking the water, it wouldn't have been out of the Grand Canal. And I suppose they felt that the water was contaminating the canal. But that and the noise at funerals. Now, they might have had a point there, because we heard about the faction fights and some of the funerals probably were a bit rowdy, you know. So they had it closed down anyway. And we had lots of people campaigning to keep it. Charles Cameron, great hero of the working class, he did everything. He was a doctor, a physicist, and he said it was all nonsense about the contamination. He examined the water, found it was perfect. And, but they wouldn't listen to him. They had already made up their mind they were going to close it down, and it remained closed for nearly 150 years. But anyway, you can buy a plot there. I have 2.
Just in case.
Just as well, actually, with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So, there you go. But a lot of what's in that show, by the way, Some of it's not in the book because I'm finding stuff all the time. A lot of, since I did the investigation of the pubs, I found all of these publicans buried over there, Broderick and all of these people, and McCann. So if it's getting another edition, they'd have to go in.
Really, just last question. I might have missed this because
Yeah, go.
the services in the old chapel, were they like interdenomination as well? Like, was there Catholic Church of Ireland services held?
Yeah, I haven't come across that now, you know. I think at the opening of it,
Yeah.
they were all represented.
Oh, sorry, at the opening.
At the opening of it, on the opening day, which is very well documented in the papers, I think there was representatives of the different churches there. Yeah,
But way back.
yeah. But that was what, 1829? You know.
I'm just thinking then was Goldenbridge not good enough for Daniel?
Oh, himself?
To be buried in it.
Well, I don't know. You'd wonder about that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
They're going to put the round tower in, maybe.
Yeah, that's
Oh, yeah.
Well,
He was so high.
he didn't organise the round tower. That came later.
Yeah, I
But,
remember I convinced my son, he was 20 years of age at the time, to visit Glasnevin Cemetery with me, and we did the tour. And it was a scorching day, it was a beautiful tour. And when we were in the tower at the base, where you go in and see the casket and so on, there was a withered long stem, a bunch of roses. And the tour guide said, these were left here by Yoko Ono about 3 to 4 weeks back.
Oh.
Yeah, he was just so highly revered and respected around the
Oh,
world.
she
as
didn't
a great
sing.
orator. John Lennon would have been looking in on that.
Yeah, that might have been another resurrection. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So, but my son was...
You mentioned this guy is buried there. Zosimus, Michael Moore, the blind poet of Dublin. He was a street poet. He used to write a lot about O'Connell. And O'Connell protected him because a lot of guys like poor old Zosimus, they were locked up for inciting violence, and because he used to give out about the government and the police and the corporation. He got away with it because he was a blind beggar, and because they knew that O'Connell would get on the case, you know. But one of his last wishes was to be buried in the shade of O'Connell, you know. And the Dublin City Ramblers actually put only in recent years, they put a headstone to him. He was buried in the pauper's plot, but there is actually a headstone beside the tower. There's Zosimus, yeah.
That's amazing.
So,
Okay.
all right.
Can I-
So there's a few books I'll say there.
And I thank you very much for that run through of close to 200 years of the opening of the cemetery and all of the connections, fascinating connections between the people and the businesses and the people who lived around here over the past 200 years and ended up being buried in the cemetery. Liam's knowledge, as you can see, is very far-reaching. Thank you very much, Liam. I just want to mention next events here that we hope will be of interest to you. Will be during the Festival of History, Dublin Festival of History, which runs in September, October. There will be a talk here presented by the library, but the talk given by myself on the Monday the 6th of October on a talk about poverty in 18th century Dublin, with particular reference to two big institutions that were built near this area, the City of Dublin Workhouse on the site of St James's Hospital and Dr. Stephen's Hospital. Both foundations founded for very different reasons aimed at the poor, one much more successful than the other. And I'll also be conducting a walk on Sunday the 12th. It's called Walking the Franchises. Riding the Franchises is an event that took place annually or biannually for a period of 700 or 800 years, when the Lord Mayor of Dublin, with 300 of his finest citizens of Dublin, got on horses and rode around the city to proclaim what the boundaries of the city were. And this walk that I do, did it in the spring, and this will be a repeat of it, covers the area on the western city, the western boundary between Dublin City and Kilmainham, around the St James Hospital, and indeed Dr. Stephen's Hospital. We end up at Dr. Stephen's Hospital by coincidence. So we hope we... 12th of October. If you are not on, most of you are probably on the mailing list and get information, just give me your email address if you'd like to be on the mailing list to hear about that. But also you can look up Dublin Festival of History, lots of events like Heritage Week this week, lots of events all over the city over about 2.5 weeks. Talks and events that will be of interest to anybody interested in history. Thank you very much for coming along.